Okay, welcome to week 7. The to-do list is at the top of the page as usual. We've got a new module in Unit 1 where we're trying to understand and clarify and make sense of arguments. We've got a new module in Unit 2, which is really a sort of a bigger section. We've moved from translations and now we're doing truth tables, and we're going to be doing this for about 4 weeks. And we are finishing up our module on cognitive biases. So let's scroll down to the module/textbook and look at the cognitive biases material for this week. So we're in week 7. We're finishing up cognitive biases. Next week, you've got the biases quiz. I'm going to post that sometime during week 7 if you want to get an early start. And just a reminder, the #1 best way to study for quizzes is to take the practice quiz. And there is a practice quiz in these materials here. So let's take a look at the cognitive biases materials. So we've got our week-by-week breakdown. We're in weeks 4 through 7. Week 7, we're focusing on implicit bias and the Dunning-Kruger effect and general conclusions for this section. So be sure to read this bit of the text and follow the links and watch the videos and look at the resources associated with these final 2 biases and complete the homework. So this week's homework doesn't include any passage analysis questions. It's multiple choice questions. You've got 3 attempts as usual. The questions change on each attempt, so completing the homework more than once is probably a good way to study for the actual quiz. And maybe space them out. Don't do it like one in a row. Just take it, 3 times over the course of the week. And as you do it, if you've seen some of the questions before, because the questions, again, they change from attempt to attempt. If you get repeat questions, don't just I already know the answer to this. Make sure you can explain why that's the best answer. Your goal is to learn, not just to get the points. Getting the points will be pretty easy if you've been doing this material for many weeks now, but the real goal is to study and be prepared for the quiz next week. Okay, so let's take a look at our new Unit 1 module, Module 6, Diagramming Arguments. I'm just going to skip to the materials here. If we scroll down, same link. Okay, there's a guide. As usual, I recommend reading the guide. I'm going to skip over this, other than pointing out that the text is pretty essential for this section, and there's a short video which I also recommend. One thing I want to say is that this is a module many students struggle with. Try not to be frustrated if this is a module that you struggle with. It's just one module. It's just one sort of small part of the overall course. It is one of the perhaps more difficult ones, but take it slow, do your best, and reach out with questions about specific exercises as they arise. The best thing you can do is when you have a question, try to articulate that question in writing, in your notes or whatever. And if you are going to reach out for help about a specific question. And I don't remember all the questions and where you got them from. So be sure to say whether it's coming from the text or a video. If you can, write down the actual whole question. And that's a good way to get feedback on this unit. And again, I've included an interactive lecture. By that, I just mean Google Slides that include questions that you should answer. So these ones in teal down here before you advance to the next slide. So it's essentially a lecture, but where you're supposed to stop and think as you go through it. And here's essentially what it'll look like. So you've been given an argument. You're going to be able to need to put it into standard form and use some of the skills that you developed in Module 5 where you clarify the argument, put it in standard form. And then we're going to visualize the structure of the argument. By structure, I mean the support relationships. And this is a simple one where you've got one premise supporting a conclusion. So this is the kind of thing it'll look like, and we'll get more advanced ones. Okay, so that's diagramming. And your homework for diagramming is multiple choice, but I definitely recommend, and the questions will change each time, but I definitely recommend if you retake it and you get repeat questions to really try them on your own and not just sort of already know what the right answer is, because again, the goal is learning. It'll pay off when it comes to the quiz and the final exam. And finally, Section 2, Unit 2, Module 3, Truth Tables. So let's scroll down to the text. We've finished up translations. We did that for 3 weeks. Now we're going to be looking at truth tables for 3 weeks. Logic quiz number 2 is going to be primarily on truth tables, but will also include translations. So we've translated arguments from English into symbolic notation, and now we will use the truth table method to evaluate those arguments as valid or invalid. And so in Logic Quiz 2, you're going to bring those sets of skills together. You'll be asked to translate arguments into symbolic notation and evaluate them using this new set of tools. So let's take a look at the materials in the truth tables section. So since this is a multiple week unit, I've got a guide to what you should do each week. This week, we're going to focus on pages 1 through 14. And your goal by the end of the week is to be able to essentially answer symbol game questions. I'll say more about that in a moment when we preview the text. So general suggestions, definitely read the text. There are video lectures, but I think the text for this is pretty essential. And the most important thing is learn by practicing. The number one thing you can do for this material is practice it. When you read it, it may seem pretty straightforward, not necessarily. But if it does, don't let that fool you. You can't know if you understand the material unless you can answer questions on your own without looking at the material. And if you can't do that, you don't understand. So give yourself the opportunity to assess your level of understanding by doing practice. And you are going to need to do more practice than the homework. The homework is the bare minimum that you should be doing. If you complete the homework without looking at any materials whatsoever and it seems super easy to you, maybe you don't need to do more practice. Maybe you're fine. But if you are, even if you're getting a perfect score on the homework, but the fact that it's guided is essential and you're not sure if you could sit down from scratch with pen and paper and answer these questions without any guidance, you need to do more practice. There is lots of practice. There's practice links to worksheets throughout the text. Usually I put them here, but there's kind of a lot of them in there. They're linked throughout the text, so definitely be using the text to learn and to find practice worksheets. That being said, I have collected all of the practice worksheets that are linked in the text into one practice packet. Let's take a look at what that looks like. This is a printable packet, and I've indicated which weeks the various parts of the packet you might focus on. There are no answers in the packet, but these questions, each section, which is labeled like this is 2.1 basics, these are all in the text, and in the text there's a link to solutions. So there are complete solutions to everything in the practice packet, but you have to go to the text to find them. There's also a page of lecture videos. I hope these are helpful, but they're not meant to replace the text for what that's worth. And then there's a bunch of Quizlets at the bottom, which are just sort of extra ways to practice. If you prefer them as sort of quick, just looking and practicing. They're not meant to be flashcards to memorize. They're meant to be practice. Okay, let's take a quick look at the text. So for this week, we're reading 1 through 14, but we're primarily focusing on this section called Symbol Game. The section called Functions is supposed to be useful, but it's not really the point. So feel free to go through this function section with a sort of leisurely way of reading or a skimming kind of reading. Our real goal here is symbol game. The point of functions is to help us sort of understand the symbol game stuff a bit more deeply, make it easier when we get to it. But it's possible that you can sort of skim through this lightly and still do well on the symbol game stuff. So the first two sections are just course connections and learning advice, which I recommend reading. And then we've got a section on functions, and this is pretty basic. Hopefully this is useful in general. And again, symbol game is where it's at for this week. All of your homework will come from this section. So you've already been translating things into symbolic notation. We've translated conjunctions into symbolic notation. And now we're going to talk about evaluating statements, conjunction statements, as true or false. And there's practice in here for each of the kinds of statements. We've got negation, conditional, disjunction, and conjunction. So that's our task for this week. And as you can see at the end, there is a worksheet here with solutions. This is the first worksheet in the practice packet. Okay, that is our week. Good luck, and don't hesitate to reach out with questions or drop by my office hours on Tuesday.